Hello, today we are starting the era of the Roaring Twenties in U.S. history, starting with lesson 2.13, Embracing the Peace. The Roaring Twenties are one of my favorite times in U.S. history, so hopefully you will find something to enjoy out of them as well. So let's start, and the Roaring Twenties. This is gonna be all divided over several lessons, but we're gonna start here with 2.13, Embracing the Peace. So let's begin. The decade following the end of World War I, the 1920s, was an era of Fords, referring to cars, flappers, and fanatics. It was also a decade of deep contradictions. The same years that gave rise to jazz, Hollywood movies, modernist art, mass consumerism, and a dynamic youth culture also witnessed resistance to progressivism and change. Reactions ranged from the rise of the fundamentalist Christianity and support for prohibition to the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan and nativism. In this period of accelerated economic growth, urbanization, and mass communication, many ordinary people welcomed the new conveniences and draws of modern life, but recoiled against social and philosophical change. Goals for this lesson describe the sources, effects, and limits of post-World War I prosperity. 2. Assess the influence of the automobile and other technologies in the 20s. Recognize major cultural trends and movements in post-World War I America, and describe the ways in which life changed for many women during the 1920s. All right, let's go. And it says daily checklist. Follow the directions on the Roaring Twenties sheet to begin work on this assignment. And of course, continue to work on your research project. So let's look at lesson resources and find our Roaring Twenties sheet. And here are the directions. The following chart lists themes connected with the 1920s. For each theme, there will be one or more questions and room to add facts related to the theme. Number 1, skim through the chapter, and we're on chapter 29, and divide it into 3 sections of equal length. Read the first section for today's lesson, the second section as part of the next lesson, and the last section as part of the third lesson. And I've divided it up into page numbers, and I'll speak to that as we go through. Before you begin reading, familiarize yourself with the themes in the chart below. Read through all of the questions. 3. Read the first third of the chapter. As you come across answers to the questions posted in the chart, write them down. Add relevant information in the third column related to each theme. The order in which information appears in the chapter will not necessarily follow the order given below in the chart. 5. You will need to have this chart completed by the end of lesson 2.15, Action and Reaction. You can use the answer key in that lesson to check your work. So there's not an answer key in this lesson or the following one, but in 2.15 you'll find the answer key for this. So if you're somebody who likes to go to the answer key right away, you can go to lesson 2.15 and you will find the answer key, the lesson answer key for this sheet there. So let's look at the theme. One theme is prosperity. Definitely a theme from the Roaring Twenties. Another theme is everyday life, which I always like learning about. Next one, a new sense of identity and personal freedom. The next one, culture, mass culture, and entertainment. Next one, culture, arts, and literature. And politics and big business. Reactions. And that's the last theme there. So lots of different things going on in the 1920s, which is why it's one of my favorite decades as well. All right, let's go back to the lesson. And we are going to start. We are going to start here, then in the textbook. Whoop, not with this page. Just a moment here. All right, here is chapter 29. Let's go back to the timeline here. In the beginning, the introduction of the chapter, and we see jazz musicians. And the previous page of that, yeah, there's a jazz band. And here's our timeline of events. And we're going to begin with the Roaring Twenties. So for this first lesson, for 2.13, we are going to read pages 646 through 651. So let's start here, the Roaring Twenties. This abyss of blood and darkness, in those stark words, the novelist Henry James summed up the Great War, referring, of course, to World War I. In Europe, World War I left behind death, destruction, and poverty. In the United States, however, it was a different story. The United States had been spared the physical ruin of the war. In the decade following the war, nicknamed the Roaring Twenties, Americans enjoyed an economic boom. They took to the streets in automobiles, shopped in department stores, and crowded into movie theaters. Along with prosperity came many social changes. In the wake of the war, American standards of social decorum and morality changed. Young ladies, once constrained by corsets and chaperones, now dared to show their legs, bob their hair, and drive automobiles by themselves. Young men and women danced to swinging jazz music. As the American songwriter Cole Porter put it, in olden days, a glimpse of stocking was looked at as something shocking, but now God knows anything goes. Some welcomed these changes as an exhilarating breath of freedom. Others saw them as an alarming challenge to tradition and order. The sweeping social and cultural changes of the 1920s incited a powerful backlash that sometimes pitted city against country, which is a theme, rural versus urban areas, native born against immigrant, Protestant against Catholic and Jew, and religion against science. At the heart of these battles was a struggle over America's national identity and character. Oh, this is so exciting. Don't you just love the 1920s? An age of prosperity. As late as 1914, the United States owed more than $3 billion to foreign investors. 5 years later, the roles were reversed. Foreign governments and individuals owed Americans almost $13 billion. As war-torn European countries struggled to recover from the war, America prospered. The roots of the nation's prosperity lay not so much in the war itself, but in the preceding decades of industrialization and technological innovation. In 1914, less than a third of American industrial plants used electric power, but by 1929, 70% of them were electrified. From textile mills to appliance factories, electric motors powered machines that allowed employees to produce more products in less time. Many businesses introduced mass production on assembly lines and used new techniques of scientific management to increase productivity. Such innovations helped the gross national product, which is GNP, the sum of all goods and services a country produces in 1 year, surge from $69 billion in 1921 to $93 billion in just 3 years later in 1924. The limits of prosperity. Between 1923 and 1929, average income in the United States rose 11%. For millions of Americans, new prosperity brought new luxuries, including indoor plumbing, electric lights, and affordable cars. While a thriving middle class enjoyed whatever newfangled gadgets and conveniences its hard-earned money could buy, the nation's wealth was concentrated at the very top. A third of the country's income went to just 5% of families, while the bottom 42% struggled to earn subsistence-level wages. Farmers in particular endured hard times in the 1920s. And this is important to note too. Limits of prosperity. We see these images of the 1920s where everybody's out buying things, having fun, but it wasn't that way for everyone, farmers in particular. They had, well, let's read before I go off on a tangent. During World War I, the government had paid farmers high prices for tons of wheat, corn, and other crops. After the war, when prices fell and government contracts ended, many farmers went from prosperity into debt. So there was a high demand and the prices were good, but after the war, demand lowered, prices went down, and it wasn't so great anymore. Although not everyone shared in the boom times, general prosperity did bring widespread benefits. The country poured money into hospitals, libraries, and education. Increased wealth funded medical research, better nutrition, and improved sanitation, all of which helped boost average life expectancy, reduce infant mortality rates, and cut the death toll from disease. Advertising and consumer culture. In the 1920s, Americans flocked to department stores or used mail-order catalogs to buy mass-produced clothing, radios, electric fans, jewelry, home furnishings, and many other goods. This consumer culture boomed in part because businesses used more and more advertising to persuade Americans to buy. Today, we're bombarded with ads all the time. This was a relatively new phenomenon here in the 1920s, really seeing the role of advertising in the consumers. In the 1920s, ads became more colorful, alluring, and sophisticated. Advertisers used techniques from the propaganda campaigns of World War I. Instead of plainly announcing a product, ads appealed to consumers' emotions. The image of a glamorous couple speeding along a sunny highway in an automobile promised fun and freedom. A fashion model's shining smile enticed consumers to buy the toothpaste that made her teeth so miraculously white. On the radio, commercials constantly prodded Americans to buy, buy, buy. Sell them dreams, one radio announcer urged a convention of salesmen. Dreams of country clubs and proms and visions of what might happen if only. After all, people don't buy things to have them. They buy hope. Hope of what your merchandise might do for them. As national mail order catalogs, chain groceries, and department stores made identical products available through America, advertisers used their persuasive power to encourage loyalty to specific brands. Shoppers in Utah could buy the same brand of detergent, the same washing machine, or the same evening dress as their compatriots in Virginia. The grocery store chain known as A&P, the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, opened thousands of stores across the country. In the automobile industry, advertisers competed to win customers over to specific brands, including the three dominant companies, Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. And let's look here. There's an ad for Coca-Cola. I can't read what it says here. I probably see it better in the textbook. What the ad itself says, but the caption here is ad became more colorful, alluring as advertisers appealed to consumers' emotions. Because look at that. Look at all these happy people drinking their Coke. They're well dressed and they're clean and they're happy. And if you drank Coke, you would feel the same way. So buy a Coke today. Refresh yourself, as the caption on the ad there too. Okay, changing values and changing lives. Fueled by advertising, the booming consumer culture signaled a change in values. In the 19th century, when goods were scarce and the average American toiled for meager rewards, thrift and self-discipline were widely regarded as all-important virtues. But in the 1920s, advertisers ignored the old ethic of frugal self-denial and instead promoted consumerism as a way to happiness. Don't save your money, spend your money, buy things. That's going to make you happy. As a change in values was revealed in a series of interviews conducted by two sociologists, Robert and Helen Lind. In the early 1920s, the Linds visited Muncie, Indiana, and reported their findings in a book titled Middletown. A mother in Muncie observed, "The dresses girls wear to school now used to be considered party dresses. My daughter would consider herself terribly abused if she had to wear the same dress to school on 2 successive days." Most Americans were enthusiastic about the wonders of modern consumer culture. Some of the products they bought really did change their lives. For example, electric appliances such as vacuum cleaners, washing machines, and irons took some of the drudgery out of housework. Refrigerators and canned foods allowed people to eat fruits and vegetables even in winter. 50 years earlier, most farmers sat in homemade chairs, in clothes sewn by their wives. Now rural families use mail-order catalogs like Sears and Roebuck to purchase the latest city conveniences. And here we go. Some new products like refrigerators and other appliances really did change consumers' lives for the better. And even on the phone, she's on the phone in a refrigerator. She's happy as can be. Buying on credit. This is important. This is really going to be something that we'll see, which will bring about the Great Depression in the 1930s. What they couldn't afford, American consumers bought on credit. Buying on installment plans, making small payments spread over time, allowed the working class to share in the consumer goods of the 1920s, even if they couldn't share in its wealth. By 1928, consumers used credit to buy 3/4 of all washing machines and 85% of all furniture. So this is before credit cards, which was buying in installment plans. And the problem we'll find with this down the road is that people were buying things, buying, but they still owed lots of money. And the manufacturers that were selling these things weren't getting all their money back right away. So the money was kind of just, things were being made and sold, but the money was just kind of stale. It wasn't really going anywhere. And this is going to be part of the problem, the buying on credit, which will lead us into the Great Depression, which will be the next unit. Okay, we're just about out of time in this video, so I'm going to stop here and we'll start with the next video in Motor Cars for the Multitudes.